Sounds good.
And you're all right. So you'll start to see people populate in, but we won't officially start here for another minute and a half or so. And I anticipate you having lots of viewers. You're very popular and you've got people coming back for more.
I heard there was around 250 people signed up.
Yeah. And you'll probably have even more folks who are just joining us live on Facebook. So
That's good.
where are you hailing from today?
I'm in Los Angeles. I'm at the Getty Center right now.
Oh, great. Great. How is it down there? Things doing rehabbing from the fires?
Yeah, there's two Gettys, one in Malibu and one in right off the main freeway here, and they closed one of them because the fire was practically on the doorstep of the other one. So all the people that work over here, there are now over here working
Over
until
here.
they open it. Yeah,
Oh, got it. So a little bit crowded.
a little bit. It's okay though.
Mm. I bet your weather is a little nicer than here in Southwest Colorado. This is not a
Well,
live photo behind me. It's actually it's been hailing and blowing and it's freezing.
it's actually cloudy and rainy right now,
Oh, okay.
so not too bad though.
Mm, excellent. All right. Well, for those of you joining us, just give us a little bit less than a minute here to allow folks to shuffle in, and we will start right at 4 o'clock sharp. Excellent. Oh, and there we are, 4 o'clock sharp. Thank you, everyone, for joining our Thursday webinar series. I'm Liz Perry, Crow Canyon's president. And before I introduce our distinguished speaker today, I have a few of our usual slides. If you're new to our webinar series, Crow Canyon, we are a not-for-profit research and education center here in Southwest Colorado. If you are joining us on Zoom today, please pop your questions in the Q&A at any time. This is a very popular webinar today, this week, so I think we may have lots of questions. So if you put them in the chat, they might get lost. If Zoom starts to give you a headache, we are live streaming successfully on Facebook, and you can also come back and watch this again and all of our other webinars on our YouTube channel. If you have not subscribed, please do. We also like to begin with an acknowledgement. Crow Canyon Archaeological Center acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Dene, and Jicarilla Apache people on whose traditional homelands our campus sits. With the work we're doing at Crow Canyon, we seek to bring light into the darkness of memory that these lands, waters, wildlife, and her descendants hold because of policies of removal, genocide, and displacement. We seek paths that support and align with Indigenous people and communities, and with gratitude, we honor the contributions of present-day Indigenous communities, descendants, and the colleagues with whom we partner who help guide our work and our mission every day. A couple extra announcements today. If you are a student or graduate student, we have a number of deadlines coming up. And if you just happen to know or a professor or have some folks that you can share with, we have our college field school that's actually, the applications are due tomorrow. So we are coming up on the deadline for that, but then we also have Indigenous Scholars in Residence, still spots. You can apply by March 15th for one of our week slots during our college field school. And then again, our second year of a partnership and first year led by Crow Canyon, our Cultural Resource Management College Field School, and that application deadline is March 15th. So if you know anybody, please do pass on to any listservs, any access that you might have to folks who might be interested in applying. You can jump on the QR codes here, and you can always email us and we'll send you some advertisements to share. The next couple of weeks of webinars, we've got some really interesting and unique programs coming up. The next couple of weeks, we've got Terry Godell, 9-time world hoop dance champion. And then the week after that, we have Victory Togetherness, the struggle for sovereignty through basketball at St. Francis Mission School with Dr. Tria Blue Wakpa. So please join us the next couple of weeks as well. If you have not checked out Dr. Ryan's latest blog post, our executive vice president of our research institute, very relevant and timely post on the Antiquities Act of 1906. Please do check that out on our website as well. And as always, every week, thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone who donated, registering for this webinar today, who has donated for the past webinars that they have signed up for. We're so grateful. This is an entirely free series for the public because of you. So we're almost entirely supported by your donations here at Crow Canyon. We could not literally do our work without you. So thank you to everyone. And if you would like to consider donating, we have a handy QR code for you here. Without further ado, we are very excited to bring back for the third time digitally and has also led a travel program for us in the past, Dr. Michael Mathiowetz, who earned his PhD in anthropology at UC Riverside in 2011 and is currently a research assistant at the Getty Research Institute in LA, where he is presently. His research focuses on questions of cultural change, the dynamic social networks that connected societies in Mesoamerica, West Mexico, and the U.S. Southwest and Mexican Northwest, and the legacies of these interactions among descendant communities. He's conducted fieldwork in the Aztatlán and Casas Grandes regions of West and Northwest Mexico, and museum and archival research on legacy collections for over 2 decades. He is widely published in peer-reviewed journals, and if you have read some of his, if you haven't read some of his recent edited volumes, we have read them here: Flower Worlds, Religion, Aesthetics, and Ideology in Mesoamerica and the American Southwest with Andrew Turner is amazing. And Reassessing the Aztatlán World, Ethnogenesis and Cultural Continuity in Northwest Mexico, most recently with John Pohl. So please, it is help me welcome, and I'm extremely grateful to have Dr. Mathiowetz here with us today. So I will turn it over to you.
All righty, thank you. Let me pull my screen up. Okay, everybody can see that? Hear me okay?
Yep, it's just perfect. Thanks so much.
All right, so today I'm going to talk about a question that has intrigued anthropologists and archaeologists for well over a century, and that's the subject of scarlet macaws in the Southwest and northern Mexico. Many people have written on the subject. There's abundant evidence in terms of faunal remains, iconography, actual feathers that have been found in various cultures in the Southwest, including Chaco Canyon, Mimbres culture of southern New Mexico, and Casas Grandes culture as well. And so for a period of around, say, 500 plus years, scarlet macaws began to show up and were valued ritually, politically, economically, by Southwestern people across New Mexico and Arizona into Utah and also Chihuahua, Mexico, and so forth. And so one of the puzzling questions that people have sought to answer is where are these coming from? Who's acquiring them? How are they getting up and so far north? And why? What do they mean to the people that acquired them from tropical regions to the south? So these are just a few examples of publications over the years. Lyndon Hargrave, Charmian McCusick, the more recent Birds of the Sun edited volume by Christopher Schwartz, Stephen Plog, and Patricia Gilman bring together many of scholars of scarlet macaws. Patricia Crown has an important article in Kiva from 2016. And what most of these scholars have concluded is that there is this unquestionable association of scarlet macaws with the sun and solar deities. And so that's going to sort of be a theme that runs throughout my talk today that I'll continually come back to. Now, in that volume, the 2022 volume, Ben Nelson, Jose Luis Punzo Diaz, and Chris Schwartz drew comparisons. They looked at the ethnography, the ethnohistory, the archaeology of the Southwest, Northwest, as well as Mesoamerica, including West Mexico, and sought to delineate what are the similarities and differences in the imagery, the context in which scarlet macaws are found and portrayed. And what they conclude is that unlike some things that we know come from Mesoamerica, such as cacao, Patricia Crown has written about cacao. Unlike cacao, which scholars have argued have parallels with its use in Mesoamerica, In the case of Scarlet Macaws, they concluded that Scarlet Macaws in the Northwest and Southwest seem to have been used by people in local contexts, so sort of adapting or creating their own context and meaning behind the use of the macaw feathers. And so what I'm going to talk about today is other evidence that may cause us to revise this conclusion. Now, in regard to this quote about cacao and its parallels in Mesoamerica, I argued that cacao from the Southwest, especially Chaco Canyon, is probably coming from a specific area of West Mexico where we know chocolate cacao is still being cultivated and grown today, as early as the early ethnohistoric period. And that's an area that is largely between San Blas, Nayarit, and Puerto Vallarta, Jalisco, the Nayarit-Jalisco border. And so I argued that this is where cacao was grown, but also where we have an abundance of evidence of cylinder vessels along the coast here. It's a very specific defined region. And so if we were to ask the question, what if it can be demonstrated that scarlet macaws also derived from this same region as cacao? How would that change our models? How would that cause us to rethink or re-envision what scarlet macaws meant to people up in the Southwest, Northwest? Now, since I started investigating scarlet macaws some 20 years ago when I started my dissertation, there's been a number of publications that have caused us to rethink how scarlet macaws, when scarlet macaws began to show up and how were they used and where they're coming from. So a series of articles over the last decade have concluded that scarlet macaws at Chaco Canyon, for example, were acquired by AD 900, corresponding with the more institutionalized or formalized hierarchies at Chaco in conjunction with these Mesoamerican objects. An article in 2018 concluded that Chaco and Mimbres scarlet macaws may have most likely come from some intermediate breeding center between the Southwest, Northwest, and Mesoamerica, but outside of wild populations. That's Richard George and colleagues. A 2021 article by Christopher Schwartz and colleagues concluded that scarlet macaws were bred at Paquime, but they were also supplemented by scarlet macaws that were imported as well through time. A more recent publication in 2022 concluded that through analysis of eggshells that scarlet macaws were being bred in the classic Mimbres region at the old town site by the early AD 1100s. Okay, so a lot of new information coming out in the last few years. Now, with regard to the history of my own research, I started to investigate scarlet macaws when I entered the graduate program at UC Riverside, anthropology, in 2002. And one of the earliest papers that I wrote for one of my classes identified scarlet macaw-headed anthropomorphic figure as a deity that's known in the Southwest as Sun Youth. And this paper that I wrote in the UCR class eventually became a publication and then later became the focus of my dissertation research, where I investigated the relationship between scarlet macaws and this sun god, as well as the macaw's relation to Katsinam, rain ritualism, maize, and flower ritualism as well, and correlated this with Pueblo IV social transformations, this ideological change. Now, my research is pretty broad, and I've investigated different threads of research, different topics that relate to how the Aztatlán tradition in West Mexico related to transformations and social organization in Chaco, Mimbres, Casas Grandes, and Puebloan regions. And so in my dissertation, 2011, I originally proposed, and this was prior to all these recent publications, I originally proposed that there was a Pacific coastal interaction route by which scarlet macaws and the affiliated Sun Youth deity derived from further south along the Pacific coast in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in Oaxaca. Now, so this area, the Aztatlán area of West Mexico, is what I'm going to focus on today. And it's the subject of a recent edited volume by John Pohl and myself, that derives from a symposium at the SAAs in 2014. And we have many senior Aztatlan and junior Aztatlan scholars in this volume. So if you're interested in this region, this would be a good place to start. Okay, the way that I've conceptualized the organization of the Aztatlan world, especially the southern part of the Aztatlan world, is through the analysis of ethno-linguistic distributions that were noted in the early historic period. And I've noticed that those ethnohistoric linguistic distributions pretty well map onto the distribution of the major Aztatlan centers. And what I've concluded in my research is that a particular sort of sub-region of the Aztatlan area along the coast, basically from Mazatlan to Puerto Vallarta, was probably the key region for Mesoamerica Southwest interactions. Because in this key region, pretty much all of the Mesoamerican ideas and goods, ritual practices that have been ascribed to Mesoamerican origin in the Southwest Northwest are found in this key region. So cacao consumption and cultivation, cylinder jars, portraiture bowls, copper, metallurgy, Mesoamerican ball game, flower worlds ritualism, solar ritualism, feathered serpents, Venus, Tlaloc, and so forth. You know, it can all be found in this key region. And this encompasses a good part of what I consider the core zone of the Aztlan tradition. Okay, so what does this mean for Scarlet Macaws? So some of the main questions that people have asked: who acquired Scarlet Macaws? How were they obtained? What was the mechanism and motivation for their acquisition? What routes did Scarlet Macaws travel in their journey northward? And did Southwest Northwest people acquire these birds in conjunction with the ideas that were associated with them in their region of origin? And this would include, of course, solar, rain, and maize ritualism. Or did they not know anything about what they meant, you know, and just sort of randomly acquired them? Okay, so what I'm going to, the way I've organized my presentation is I'm going to talk about some of the issues in terms of characterizing the geographical range of Scarlet Macaws. I'll present some of the main perspectives by Southwest Northwest scholars who look towards more of a north to south pilgrimage to various parts of Mesoamerica and West Mexico. I'll critique some of the models and raise some issues. And then I'll present some perspectives from the South and what West Mexican scholars say about the acquisition of Scarlet Macaws from a south to north perspective. To investigate those lines of thought, I will present my characterization of how the Aztatlan core zone was organized socially, religiously, politically, and on a regional scale. And what I'll propose is that Scarlet Macaws in the Southwest Northwest probably are coming through the Aztatlan region as part of a cargo system that developed in the early post-classic around 850, 900 via an Aztatlan to Huasteca network, cross-continental. Okay, so this is going to involve iconographic investigations, iconographic studies, and some archaeologists, some archaeological colleagues have critiqued iconographic studies as being basically worthless, you know, critiquing these sorts of investigations by labeling them as cherry picking, by deriding them as just sort of art historical perspectives, as being just rooted in opinion, that it's superficial, that we're not really archaeologists, and so forth. And that's not the case. You know, a lot of the people that level these sorts of critiques don't have a background in studying art and symbolism and ritual in the pre-Hispanic era. They have little grasp of the ethnology by which to compare that symbolism to, little control of the understanding of the relationship between different pre-Hispanic deities and the deity complexes. And these critiques often ignore other lines of evidence that can substantiate those iconographic interpretations. Now, when it comes to the geographical distribution of Scarlet Macaws, There's some variance that's been proposed in recent years, and I just present two side-by-side maps from publications by Chris Schwartz and colleagues. On the one on the left is sort of the generally accepted distribution of Scarlet Macaws along the Gulf Coast, as well as the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. But in a subsequent presentation, they published a map that showed a further northern range of Scarlet Macaws extending up into Tamaulipas and Nuevo León. And they're citing a Conabio study for the rationale to extend that range. I contacted the person that conducted that study, A.T. Peterson, and he confirmed that this extension is really, it's just a proposition for the potential distribution. So it's based on ecological niche models of habitats that could potentially be suitable for Scarlet Macaws. So that's not the actual range, it's the possibility of what the range could have been. So the first map is probably the better option that we should stick with, in my opinion. Okay, so let's look at some of the models of Mesoamerica's Southwest interaction and what some Southwest-Northwest scholars have proposed for how macaws were traveling up to the far north. And these are basically encapsulated within pilgrimage models that involve long-distance ritual specialists. Okay, so to briefly characterize Scarlet Macaws and the age at which they were transported, scholars conclude that macaw chicks generally hatch around December to March. They were likely transported during the chick or nestling stage within 3 to 11 weeks after birth, when they could better survive. They generally died in the Southwest Northwest at around 1 year of age. So they really had a pretty short lifespan. It's important to note that the people who are acquiring them, these are not birds that you can transport down the line from one person to another. Usually the person that is taking care of the bird is the one who transported it because there's of the bonding mechanisms between bird and human. Okay, so thus far, there are 3 main corridors that have been proposed for the movement of Scarlet Macaws. So I'll talk briefly about the route that extends from the Rio Grande, along the Rio Grande, from the Mimbres area to the Huasteca. I'll talk about a proposal for a corridor of exchange along the eastern flanks of the Sierra Madre Occidental. And then I'll talk about some more detail about the specific coastal model that I am proposing that could extend to Oaxaca, but I'll expand on that, as you'll see. Okay, so the first model is that proposed by Patricia Gilman and Mark Thompson. They have a number of publications on this subject. And basically what they're arguing is that Mimbres people traveled along, women in particular, traveled along the Rio Grande down to the Huasteca, obtained Scarlet Macaws, and brought back with them Popol Vuh and Hero Twins ritualism that was then portrayed on classic Mimbres ceramics. One of the problems, some of the problems that I've pointed out in past presentations and future publications is that there's no Popol Vuh ritualism identified during the post-classic period in the Huasteca area, so it's absent. There are no historic routes, early historic contact period routes that were observed by Spaniards following the Rio Grande all the way up into the Mimbres. And this model is only focuses on Mimbres area and doesn't really consider or explain macaws at sites like Paquimé or in the Hohokam region or Chaco and so forth. That's just a brief presentation on that. Another recent model is proposed by Michael Whalen, who is sort of reviving Charles de Peso's Pochteca model, in which he argued that traveling merchants may have traveled through what he calls the SDC region, possibly obtaining macaws from the Huasteca. And and that's Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua, this sort of border region between those three states in Mexico. And he's looking for comparison to 16th century accounts of Akashi bird merchants around Sinaloa and western Durango as supportive of his model. So 2 issues that I've found with that is that he admits that it's largely a circumstantial argument. There's no evidence for Scarlet Macaw breeding or raising in that SDC area. He has concluded that the Akashi could have been transporting Scarlet Macaws, but Ben Nelson and colleagues say, no, these are probably green military macaws and not Scarlet Macaws. Another issue is that other scholars, such as Ben Nelson, have investigated potential corridors of interaction through this region between the Casas Grandes region and the Chalchihuites region. Ben Nelson concluded that his studies on the ground concluded that there was just no evidence for any such of trade regional system in that area. Other models for, doesn't necessarily specifically mention macaws in any great detail, is the pilgrimage model to the west coast, along the west coast. So the Fishes, Suzanne and Paul Fish, have published a recent chapter on Hohokam, peregrinations or pilgrimages to the site of Amapa, and they drew a lot of comparisons to Amapa in terms of, people are going down there, observing what's going on at Amapa, and then bringing back things like platform mound architecture, ideas about mound architecture, and so forth. A correlate to that, a similar model is proposed by Scott Nicolai, who argues that Mogollon people, Mimbres, who are not a Mogollon people, were long-distance ritual specialists who traveled also to Amapa, but that Mesoamericanists were not traveling north, only people traveling south. And so what he argues is that people are traveling to Amapa, tutoring under Aztatlán ritual specialists to learn about Tlaloc ritualism. They make a hypothetical bundle, bring that bundle up into the Southwest, and then start practicing Tlaloc-related Katsina ritualism. And so it's the problem with this is that there's no evidence for this. I've worked at Amapa with Amapa material in that region for 20 years. There's zero evidence for this. So it's sort of a model that doesn't really show clear understanding of what's happening in this core region. And he doesn't explain really how macaws factor into this. So what we're coming to, and this is something John Paul has characterized as cultural tourism models of interaction, is that, okay, so are we going to make the argument that all Southwestern cultures had people traveling down to Amapa and acquiring piecemeal whatever it is that they saw at Amapa that they liked? I mean, there's a lot of issues, I think, with these sorts of models. I'll leave it that for now. Okay, now one recent publication in the Birds of the Sun volume that's of interest is Peter Whiteley's study of terminology, language, and linguistic terms for Scarlet Macaws. And so what he noticed was that there's a chain of Uto-Aztecan speaking people that have cognates for the term macaw basically following the Pacific coast, along the western part of the Sierra Madre Occidental. So he looked at various linguistic groups. So Hopi were most closely related to Hopi terminology to Southern Uto-Aztecans. Zuni were most closely related to Mayan-speaking people, and Tanoan terminology for Scarlet Macaws closely related to Otomanguean people. So what we're looking at is this route that seems to have followed the coast, but then somehow involves this area right here where we see Mayan and Otomanguean speaking people. So this idea that there could be some potentially multilinguistic or multi-ethnic networks that exist that could have involved multiple partnerships of people, including nomadic people. Okay, so this is a sort of linguistic evidence. How does that correlate with what we see in the ethnohistoric record and the archaeological record along the Pacific coast? Do we have evidence of Scarlet Macaws in the contact period documents of West Mexico? Now, one of the things that people have neglected to investigate is the Lienzo de Tlaxcala. So this is a document that was painted in the early 1550s, portraying events throughout Mexico and Guatemala, conquest events, basically between 1519 and 1541. There's a number of versions, but the Alfredo Chavero copy from the original in the 1860s was painted to perfectly match the color scheme of the original. That's important. And so what this Lienzo depicts is the conquest of Mexico from the native Tlaxcalan perspective, native people who accompanied the Spaniards throughout Mexico as hired mercenaries, basically. And so the blue part down here portrays West Mexico, the conquest of West Mexico, largely between the 1530 and 1531, with some scholars arguing up to 1541. Now, this is important. These are little cells that depict those conquest scenes. So from starting in Michoacan in the highlands, down through Tepic, Nayarit, down to the coast around Amapa. There's 24 towns depicted in these cells in the Lienzo. Now, what I found in investigating these cells and the imagery within these cells is that we see long red feathers portrayed primarily in the area that I have defined as the key region, basically between San Blas Nayarit up into southern Sinaloa and even up into central Sinaloa as well, up to Culiacan. Okay, so there's a lot of red birds that we could consider as being the feathers portrayed in the Lienzo de Tlaxcala, but none have the very long feathers that are portrayed. Okay, so this is one example, Tecomantlan in Nayarit. I'm going to talk mainly about these images in the Pacific, along the Pacific coast. We know from historical documents that there were thousands of warriors that accosted the Spaniards, 3,000 at Tecomantlan. Some were observed wearing plumes of guacamayas and herons. And Gordon Groscup proposed that the site of Amapa that may have been Tecomantlan or Sion, the nearby Sion. Okay, so these are warriors wearing long red wavy feathers. Okay, so Sion nearby. Again, Groscup suggested this could be Amapa. Again, here we see a figure wearing a back device with long red plumes towering over his head. Now, I've compared these long red plumes and back devices to how Pueblo people use scarlet macaw feathers today, as mounted in back devices towering over their heads, basically symbolizing the close relationship between the sun and dawn and these ritual or warrior specialists. So for the Lienzo example, these scarlet macaw, probably scarlet macaw feathers towering over the head could relate the warriors to the sun. Okay, Chametla in southern Sinaloa, again, a figure wearing long red feathers. Colipan, further north in north of the Rio Quetzala, again, this figure has red feathers. And we start to see they gradually start to get smaller number and smaller number as you move north. This is Piaztlan in Sinaloa. And so what we're seeing, and I have a longer discussion of this in a forthcoming paper, what we're seeing is this very narrow region along the Pacific coast where we see scarlet macaw feathers in the ethnohistoric documents basically derived from the conquest in 1530. Now, one of the towns I did not mention yet is the Pueblo of Quetzalan along the Rio Quetzala in sort of southern Sinaloa. Now, this town of Quetzalan is important because we know other towns named Quetzalan in Mesoamerica. So early historic documents from tribute lists from the Aztec, central Mexico, scholars have concluded that the toponym of Quetzalan is a bunch of scarlet macaw feathers, and these two teeth is a sort of a locative suffix. It basically means place of the scarlet macaw feathers or place of the red macaw tail feathers. Okay, another example from the Codex Mendoza, Franny Bourdain and Patricia Annawalt concluded that Quetzalan means where there are many scarlet macaw feathers. And here we see the red feathers and the teeth, place of. So by that, I've concluded that this toponym, these are all toponyms on these mountains with qualifying glyphs, basically, means that the place of Quetzalan is the place of the scarlet macaw tail feathers in Piaztlan. And so Quetzalin, the term Quetzalin, Thelma Sullivan concluded refers to the tail or wing of scarlet macaw feathers. So again, that's another bit of evidence that suggests that this is not the Quetzal bird, but Quetzalan, Quetzalin, the feathers of the macaw, scarlet macaw. Now, what's important about this distribution is that it is essentially in the core zone, Aztatlán core zone. This was the center of Xochipilli worship, who we know is a deity who is portrayed in Central Mexican manuscripts wearing a scarlet macaw head. So I suggest that these red feathers in the area where Xochipilli worship flourished the most probably relates to the sun and this sun god in particular. Okay, so let's look at the archaeology. We've talked about the ethnohistory. Is there evidence of Scarlet Macaws in West Mexico, particularly in this region? And if so, how did they get to West Mexico? Who transported them? Why? What mechanism? Okay, so first I want to talk about a recent proposal by Peter Jimenez that Scarlet Macaw trade routes may have come through highland Mexico from Tula to the Gulf Coast. And what Jimenez argues in his 2018 dissertation, his 2020 book, is that he's suggesting a down-the-line exchange from El Tajín through Tula, through the highlands, through like the Lake Chapala area, and down to the Amapa area, and then up into the southwest. And what he suggests is that macaws are moving along the same corridor as cacao, copper, and shell to Mimbres and Chaco. He only really focuses on the early post-classic period, AD 900 to 1200. So his proposal mirrors what I proposed in my dissertation with regard to the Aztatlán relationship to the southwest-northwest. Now, when we look at Tula, there's no, to my knowledge, no macaws have been found at Tula. There are macaws, however, portrayed on ceramics. This is a vessel that was imported to Tula. It's a white-slipped papagayo polychrome or Las Vegas polychrome, either from the Nicoya region or from Honduras. So while Peter Jimenez argues that macaws at Tula, hypothetically, would come from El Tajín, here we see that the macaws that are actually showing up on the ceramics are coming from the Pacific coast down in Honduras or Nicoya region. Now, the way that Jimenez describes his model, with Tula as being the sort of the center point of it all, he characterizes this connectivity to the southwest-northwest as pulsations or pulses. So he's using these terms derived from Christopher Chase Dunn that's sort of nebulous. It doesn't really tell us much about the specificity of how these societies were organized or how these mechanisms of interaction operated. And he's particularly arguing that this is all related to a Tlaloc complex. So there's a number of issues with this. First, he only focuses on the post-classic period. He doesn't focus upon the middle post-classic. So AD 900 to 1200. Okay, well, what about afterwards with Paquime and Pueblo IV and so forth? He does not investigate the specificities of social and political organization in the core zone, basically just characterizing it as decentralized, no real paramount center. He doesn't show evidence of scarlet macaws or feathers or their use anywhere in the Aztatlán area, and doesn't describe who's doing this or model who's doing this, how were they acquired, or why. Now, another part of the problem is that he's only focusing on Tula. He doesn't include the Huastec region, doesn't include Cholula, doesn't include Lower Central America. So it's a very sort of narrow-focused model that many of my colleagues, other colleagues, have observed connectivity between the Aztatlán area and these other regions. Now, when it comes to the ideology, he only focuses on Tlaloc, doesn't look at any of the other deity complex and how these all relate, and largely characterizes it as a standalone complex, that's not how we approach iconography and religion. And finally, the cargo system that I've defined for the Aztatlán core zone is not, in terms of the portraiture bowl tradition, is not present at Tula. So it doesn't seem to be that the developments in the core zone have any direct relation with Tula. It seems to be more Pacific coastal oriented or Huastec related. And so that comes to what I've proposed in recent presentations and publications. This idea that there is a cargo system developing in the core zone around AD 850, 900. And it's that cargo system that forges those connections with the Huastec region through landscape ritualism. Okay, so we know of cargo systems in West Mexico because through the Huichol, they're probably the more well-known practitioners of cargos. And what I've argued is that their antecedents, Aztatlán people in the core zone, were practicing a very similar sort of cargo ritualism. So these cargo holders could have obtained scarlet macaws from the Huasteca, maybe even from Oaxaca. All right, so the way that the core zone is organized, as I've argued, many people have looked at the social organization of the Aztatlán region. J. Charles Kelly, Joe Mountjoy, Helmut Pubel, Susana Ramirez. I argued that the coastal polities, following scholars like Kelly and Pubel, involved city-states or basically paramount centers, señoríos or cacicazgos that were independent polities that were all connected through shared ritualism and feasting. So no paramount center, multiple kingdoms of families operating within this cargo system. So they had sort of defined territories around their centers, possibly intermarrying. Why this is important is that they all seem to be practicing this cargo system, this very narrow area. And I've written extensively and presented extensively on this. You can see one of my talks, Crow Canyon Talks, 2021, Ostlander Talk on YouTube, 2024, and a number of past and forthcoming publications. Now, these cargo systems for Huichol are centered upon the relationship between ceremonialism at paramount centers that tie together ceremonialism at smaller sites, at rancherias. Cargo holders have 5-year terms of office in which they become the gods. They take on cargoes or burdens of a particular deity, and they fulfill that role of the deity for their 5-year term of office. They live in god houses, for example. So what we can see in Huichol cargo systems are really similar material culture to what we see in the Aztatlán area. So I've argued that these circular stone, carved stones are probably Aztatlán Tepari, these godhouse stones, while these bowls, these figurative bowls, probably are the bowls that the Huichol cargo holders curate during their time of office. They've got portrayals of specific deities or icons related to specific deities. So the point is that we see evidence for a cargo system in the Aztatlán area. Probably the clearest evidence is of this is their wearing of golden mirrors. This is a mirror that was found on the chest of an Aztatlán elite in the city of Tepic by Karl Lumholtz in the 1890s. I've argued that these golden mirrors are the same cargo mirrors worn by Huichol cargo holders. It's an earlier version of it. Now, cargo holders for the Huichol are characterized by their extensive landscape ritualism. So this is a forthcoming publication. Chaco Canyon specialists may be interested in this, in how cargo holders use chocolate as a ritual offering at all the places across West Mexico that they visit and deposit into springs and caves and mountains and so forth, mountaintop shrines. Forthcoming. Now, these cargo holders travel across West Mexico, 90,000 square kilometers, to the four corners of their territory, and they're basically culminating in their journey to Wirikuta and San Luis Potosi. I think Aztatlán cargo holders probably initiated this journey. Now, we can look at oral histories of Huichol people to get a sense of when these cargo systems may have developed. Two Huichol traditions recorded by Phil Wigan indicated that the site of La Quemada was sacked and burned by Huichol cargo holders because the elites at La Quemada interfered with their cargo system. So in turn, they couldn't get it was part of their feather network and their peyote network. And so they were angry enough to sack and burn it. So we don't know for sure that it was Huichol cargo holders, but we know that La Quemada was burned between 850 to 960, and then again in the early 1000s and 1100s. So precisely when the cargo system was developing. Lopez Delgado and colleagues argued that this corresponded with the rise of the Aztatlán network. So I suggest that it could well involve cargo holders. Okay, so when do we see scarlet macaw feathers and where in West Mexico? Probably the earliest depiction is from a pseudocoisonate vessel from Jiquilpan, Michoacan, This is ceramics that were epiclassic. Maria Harris has identified long red feathers on a number of individuals as probably Scarlet Macaws, and I don't have a problem with this at all. But we should note that pseudocloisonne iconography is very different than Aztatlán iconography. I don't see this an evolutionary development between epiclassic pseudocloisonne ceramics and the narrative codex style ceramics we see showing up in the Nayarit area around AD, probably 1200 is probably when we see these narratives. So let's look at that one example. That one example is what I know of. Let's look at the Aztatlán area. We know ethnographically, ethnohistorically, this is where we see prominent long red feathers portrayed. So happens that that's the exact same region where we see archaeological depictions of long red feathers. So these are Aztatlán ceramics, early post-classic. We see this is a feather bundle device with long red and white feathers. It seems to be a convention that could indicate long red scarlet macaw feathers paired with white heron feathers. This is from coastal Nayarit, early post-classic. This is a middle post-classic vessel. This is on the cover of our book. And what these scenes portray are birth and baptismal ritualism related to a sun god overseen by a solar deity. On this vessel, there are a number of individuals wearing long red feathers, worn by cargo holders with their golden discs, by people who wear solar back mirrors, teskakwi and nose piercings that indicate that they are titled landholding elites, worn by Tlaloc, Zawi, rain deities, worn by the Venus deity, and typically worn in the headdress or pendant to the wrist, sometimes on temple rooftops. These are examples from that vessel. This is a detail of long red and white feathers, probably scarlet macaw and heron. The one on the right, again, pendant to the wrist, with a figure wearing one of those cargo mirrors. These are the four directional tlalocs or tzawis participating or overlooking a baptismal scene. 3 of them have long red feathers in their headdresses. This is a figure on the rim of the vessel, 2 figures. One wears a cargo mirror, yellow hair indicating he's a solar being, and a particular nose piercing related to landholding elites. He's paired with this figure, who is a skeletal deity that I suggest is a Venus deity, probably a morning star deity. And you can see the red and white feathers that's pendant to his wrist. So this figure with the yellow hair, skeletal jaw, copper probably back mirror, flint knife at the nose, and long red and white feathers is the same figure probably showing up on those cargo bowls and cargo godstones that go in the god houses. This is another vessel, same type, Iguanus polychrome, 1100 to 1350. This is a detail of a figure that I have argued is a cargo holder. Yellow hair, nose ornament. He's wearing a collar with metal bells. He's got his big golden disc mirror. Now, what more? There's another figure on this vessel wearing the same set of implements. Golden mirror, cargo mirror, long red feather here. You can only see part of it, probably a scarlet macaw. He's holding a vessel that is a form that we know is a cacao vessel form. And he's wearing bells on his wrists, his collar, his knees, and his belt right here. Long distance ritual specialist wearing and holding all of the things that we're seeing showing up in the Southwest, Northwest. So if we're looking for ritual specialists that are traveling long distance, this is the best candidate. So how did they get macaws from the Huasteca? What we know is that Nuno de Guzman recorded an account in 1530 of a trader from Oxitipar, who, the son of a trader, who accompanied his father into the backcountry for 40 days to trade feathers for gold and silver objects. The northernmost scarlet macaw remains on this side is at Vista Hermosa, where we find remains. These traders traveled for 200 leagues to trade for metal objects. Only place that we're seeing gold and silver objects in northern Mexico, there's none north of the Huasteca. but there's a bunch over in the Aztatlán area. What more, 800 leagues is the precise distance practically if one were to travel from Oxitipar to the north, through Wirikuta, and down to the Aztatlán core zone. So very good candidate for Tejo's father's journey. We know that Dorothy Hosler has argued with Geestresser-Pean that Huastec metallurgy was introduced from West Mexico. So we may be in the position to argue that West Mexican metal may have been traded in metallurgy for Huastec and Scarlet Macaws. Okay, so this is my proposal for how Scarlet Macaws got from the Gulf Coast Huastec region to this area where we see archaeologically and ethnohistorically abundance of long red feathers, then conveyed up the coast. Now, when we think about it even further, cargo holders today for Huichol only travel during a specific period. During the dry season, largely between October to March. It's a 6-week round trip journey, 43 days round trip. They travel only during the dry season and return from Wirikuta, symbolically bringing with them the rains, which begin, we know, the rainy season in June. So conceivably, if we recall that Scarlet Macaws hatch between December and March, which basically correlates with the timing of the cargo system, peregrination to Wirikuta, by the time the Aztatlán cargo holders got to Wirikuta, maybe even traveling further into the Huasteca, the macaws would have been ready to go. They would have been of the right age, 3 to 11 weeks in age. Okay, so this is sort of the system I'm proposing. Cargo system journey to Wirikuta, maybe rendezvousing with people up here, maybe going down into the Huasteca, potentially joining up with networks. William Ringel, Shankari Patel have pointed out that there is a extensive post-classic and epi-classic pilgrimage system, interaction system, that would have led Aztatlán or Huastec people down into these regions where the wild macaws were first derived. Okay, so this argument that I'm proposing really correlates well with what Laura Solar has proposed in the Aztatlán volume, that there are these major coastal interaction corridors, Pacific Coast as well as Gulf Coast. So my model better aligns with what Laura Solar is proposing than what Peter Jimenez is proposing. Okay, so in sum, what I've argued is that Aztatlán cargo systems developed around 850 to 900. They correspond with the collapse of epi-classic inland highland systems, a reorientation to the coast. This ritualism involved cargo systems that involve people traveling to Wirikuta, San Luis Potosi, possibly continuing to the Huasteca, maybe acquiring Scarlet Macaws from breeding centers there, maybe even going down to the wild source to get macaws themselves. So it's Aztatlán people, I think, that are getting the macaws, facilitating not just those, but all the other things like cacao and copper and so forth that we see showing up among various cultures. So there's probably multiple routes and interactions and networks that the Southwest Northwest consumers are forming with Aztatlán middlemen. Okay, and so just to finalize it, the area that we see all of this scarlet macaw and cacao and copper imagery in the Aztatlán area precisely overlaps with where I see the most abundant flower world imagery in the Aztatlán core zone. This is a complex of ideas that Southwestern people may have been adopting or adapting along with the objects that embody that ritual knowledge. So they're not meaningless. They probably knew quite well what these objects meant. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mike. That spectacular. We have a lot of, I'm going to jump right into some Q&A because we have a bunch of sort of questions and requests for some clarification from our viewers who maybe aren't as deep on some of these concepts. Could you give a little 101 on the cargo holder concept?
Yeah. So cargoes are basically burdens of office. So for Huichol people, and I've argued for Aztatlán people, we know that the Huichol cargo system operates on, on a system of 5-year terms of office. People take on the identity of a specific deity in mytho-historical narratives of the ancestors. They become an ancestor god. And the bowls, they curate bowls that those bowls have imagery in them that they're not just depicting a god. The bowls are a god, so they curate them within their god houses, in their rancherias, but they also participate in ritualism at the ceremonial center. They can have up to 10 consecutive cargoes in their lifetime for 50 years.
Wow.
But they could be different deities. And then they would sort of impersonate or enact or reenact those narratives associated with that god. So we have a group of people who aren't just doing a one-off trip to Wirikuta. It's a predictable, scheduled route that people can follow their entire lives as a cargo holder. They stop at particular places, make particular offerings at particular times. So it's not just this random pocheteca, wandering around with whatever. It's highly organized. And so I see in what I've presented and things I know that I have not yet presented, that what Huichol people are doing is practically identical what I see Aztatlán core zone people doing.
Excellent. Thank you. One of our viewers asks about what is it about scarlet macaws that you referenced? There's green macaws, there's other kinds of macaws.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's military macaws, yeah, that show up in cave in far northern Mexico. Some people have said, well, okay, it's like 2,000 years old or so. Decontextualized because it was pulled out of the cave, but still, some scholars have said, well, okay, they're interested in military macaws. That probably like kind of greased the wheels for them to accept scarlet macaws, but I don't necessarily see that argument. It's a different geographical distribution of military macaws than scarlet macaws. But scarlet macaws are predominantly associated with dawn. The whole reason that cargo holders travel to Wirikuta, not just to collect peyote, it's part of the narrative of the origin of their world. That's where the sun was born, from Cerro Quemado, burned mountain. It's this hill. And so they're basically going as the ancestor gods to observe the birth of the sun. And that's how all this ties into that dawn and sun ritualism, is that the colored feathers, we know this from Pueblo people, is that the colors of the feathers signify sort of the changing color of the sky as the sun rises at dawn into the sky.
Fantastic. I'm going to try to lump and summarize a couple questions around around macaws getting into communities in the southwestern U.S. and some questions around. We hear tell that people weren't very good at taking care of these birds once they got to the Southwest. Is that something that you hear? And do they get here and do they breed them once they're here so that you have populations of macaws here? Can you speak a little bit to once live macaws maybe get to this part of the world?
Yeah, so the scholars who study the skeletons of the scarlet macaws in the Southwest Northwest conclude that they don't get a lot of sunlight. They have a lot of pathologies. They didn't have the right diet, so they weren't really in the best shape. So that a lot of them died around or at 1 year of age. Some people have suggested maybe they were ritually sacrificed, but it could be all these health and dietary factors that factor in why they didn't. They can live for 40 years in captivity, but these ones, no. I mean, they produce, I think, if I'm correct, long red feathers around 8 months of age or so. So they would have died not too long after starting that process. So there would have been this need to continually have at least some coming into the Southwest, Northwest again to replenish. Michael Whalen has talked about, cast doubt on breeding of scarlet macaws at Pakime, but Chris Schwartz and colleagues have said, well, that doesn't really explain the isotopic evidence that indicate that these are, in fact, locally bred or raised birds. So they are not all just being brought in. Some are being raised there. I'm sure everybody, these Chris probably has a lot of stuff that he hasn't published yet on this, so I'll defer to him on that.
Some questions around of the macaws are coming north. Are there important things going south from here?
I've been asked that. I mean, we know from oral traditions of various Pueblo groups that there are people, thinking of Zuni, the people who went to the south, the lost others, went to the south, never to return except sometimes to trade macaws. So the idea that I'm not against the idea that Southwest, Northwest people could have gone down to Amapa, the core zone, gone to wherever, Oaxaca, through to the Huasteca. I'm not opposed to any of that. But when it comes to like actual physical evidence from the archaeological record of the area around Amapa, I know colleagues that have worked in that area for decades. There's not a single sherd from the Southwest, Northwest showing up on the Nayarit coastal plain, for example. So if there were evidence, I would probably, be clamoring to talk about it. But the majority of evidence we see for interactions between these societies is a south to north dissemination of goods and ideas. Now I agree, we need to investigate the north to south connectivity. I would be happy to collaborate with anybody that wants to investigate that and see what we can come up with. But I don't necessarily really see it at this point.
Right. No, thank you. And we'll maybe wrap up on a couple of different questions, observations from folks in the Q&A around people. Are there connections potentially between cargo holders and Katsina religion? Are there ties, cargo systems and Chaco and outliers? Or so people are kind of wondering if there's something to some of these potential comparisons.
Yes, I see. Okay, so cargo holders, in my view, are preeminently, or they have a very strong role in rainmaking ritualism. And that's what I argue is the whole point of traveling to all these spots on the landscape, making offerings at places like springs and caves and mountaintop shrines. One of the practices they engage in is where they're visiting is where ancestors live on the landscape. And so what they're doing is they're going to these places, depositing offerings, collecting water from those places, basically collecting the ancestral rain spirits as water, and you'll see them lugging around today like big 2-liter bottles of Coke, empty bottles full of this water. They bring it back to their communities and then use it in water sprinkling and ritual bathing practices. So they're basically bringing the ancestors from around the landscape, these ritual spots, back to their center place, and then engaging in rituals that bring their flowery world into existence by way of the ancestors who water the landscape. So totally Katsina-like, yeah. And so we see this as, by AD 850.
Fantastic. And just to tie up some of that conversation about the things are going north but not going south, how did they pay for the macaws and the macaw feathers if they didn't have anything of interest to folks in the south?
Who knows? I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, that's something that needs to be investigated in collaboration with Native groups. They know, they have detailed histories of these connections, and a lot of archaeologists don't pay attention to it and find it, they just don't value it as much as it should be valued. So why this happened, who's doing it, we can learn so much more by engaging in collaborative relations with Native people.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect observation and lesson for us to end on tonight. Thank you so much, Dr.
Sure.
Mathiowetz, for another wonderful talk. We will not quit pestering you for more of these. So thank you so much for always coming and presenting in the Crow Canyon series and talking to all of our folks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, Mike. Hope to see you soon.
Alrighty, bye.